Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Well, good afternoon to everybody. This is coming towards the end of the Rains Retreat, so we have this Sunday and next Sunday will be the last two of these Sunday talks. The theme for today is the questions of Vacchagotta. So some of you who are familiar with the Pali scriptures will recognize that name. Others of you who have not spent so much time looking at the suttas will think, who's Vacchagotta? You can look him up on Wikipedia now, I'm sure. So Vacchagotta was a wanderer of a different group in the time of the Buddha, and was a frequent visitor. Went to see the Buddha many, many times and asked various questions, and particularly because the range of questions that he asked and the ongoing contact between the two has got quite a rich area of material. I thought this would be a good theme to explore for a Sunday afternoon. Maybe before beginning with Vacchagotta, it's helpful to understand how the Buddha related to questions. There are many, many dialogues. A lot of the Pali Canon, both the Sutta Pitaka and the Vinaya Pitaka, the collection on discipline and the collection on the teachings, they have a lot of conversations between the Buddha and other people. It's very, very common format, and so that the way that the Buddha responded to questions varied from time to time and from place to place. And so you can broadly divide this up into 4 different ways of responding to questions. So the first kind is the Buddha would give a straight answer. Someone would ask a question, like we have pretty much all 4 of these types are represented in these questions of Vacchagotta that I'll try to cover this afternoon. So the first kind is a straight answer, that you ask, what is the wholesome, what is the unwholesome, and then the Buddha gives a straight answer in response to the question. The second type is a qualified answer, or sometimes the Buddha would rephrase the question and say, well, yes, that's you can ask that, but also there is a different way of looking at it, or perhaps you can rephrase the question in a different manner. So, for example, when in a different discourse, when the Buddha was talking to the householder Kevada, the Buddha was telling a story about how a monk had the thought, where is it that earth, water, fire and wind fade out and cease without remainder? And there's a long story that goes along with that, but I can get to another time. But as the story progresses, the Buddha then says to this monk, well, instead of asking, where is it that earth, water, fire and wind cease without remainder, instead you should have asked where it is that earth, water, fire and wind can find no basis, where they can't get any traction, where they can find no footing. That would be the correct way to ask the question. So that's a qualified answer, or a rephrasing the question. The third type is he would ask a counter question. So someone would ask a question and the Buddha would say, well, can I ask you something in return? And that was frequently a mode that he chose, so that he wouldn't answer the question in its own terms, but he would ask what's called a counter question, or he would be developing a theme, or as in a way helping the person to understand through asking them a question. And we get one of the most significant dialogues with Vacchagotta is exactly where the Buddha does this, using the simile of fire. And then the last kind of response to a question is to completely put the question aside, to not answer it at all. And so we also get that fourth way of responding that the Buddha gave. So I find this very interesting, these four different ways of dealing with questions, because I tend to be a compulsive answerer. That if somebody asks me a question, I'll just immediately answer it. I've got to go to my kind of information bank, and I'll always answer the question in the same terms that the person asked. But these different models of how to respond to a question, I usually think about them later. And also the example of Venerable Ajahn Chah, Luang Por Chah, he almost never answered a question in the terms in which it was asked, but he would frequently receive the question, kind of dismantle it and hand you the bits back so that you could put it together yourself. He would, in a way, he had a style of getting people to answer their own questions. He would help you to sort of follow things through to where the question came from. And another interesting comment about that, before I start on Vacchagotta's story, is when somebody was visiting Ajahn Chah one time, many years ago, they said, Luang Por, it's amazing. Everybody who comes here, whether they're one of the villagers, they're like a rice farmer, or they're the kind of the governor of the province, or they're a military officer, or they're a bureaucrat from Bangkok, whoever it is, you seem to be able to help people to kind of answer their own questions. Somehow you receive the question and then you hand it back to them, and they find a way of answering it for themselves. How do you do that? That's amazing. You must be so knowledgeable, and it's so incredible. And then Ajahn Chah said, well, if they didn't already know the answer to the question, they couldn't have asked it in the first place. So it takes a bit of pondering. If you didn't already know the answer to the question, you couldn't have put the question in the first place. So if when you hear those words you go, huh? That's good. Because it opens up that sense of, how can that be? Or what's he talking about? Or how can that work? But anyway, so to go to Vacchagotta, so he was a wanderer. He seems to have come from the area of Rajagaha, modern-day Rajgir. The name Vacchagotta means the clan of the calves, C-A-L-V-E-S. So like a young cow is a calf. So, and it's interesting that the word Vacha in Pali seems to be connected to the French word vache for a cow. Vacha means a calf. So the clan of the calves was his family name. Gota is like the clan. So he was of the clan of the calves. It doesn't say exactly which particular religious group he belonged to. It just says he was a wanderer, an adherent to a different sect. So he's one who'd left the home life. He was a samana, a wanderer. But he frequently came to see the Buddha. And in the scriptures you have many of these encounters. Funnily enough, there's a section of the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses, and there's 55 dialogues of Vacchagotta with the Buddha. And you think, oh, that's a really rich collection. But actually they will say almost exactly the same thing 55 times over. So that it's called the Vacchagotta Samyutta. So that's surprisingly not a particularly rich source for material. But in those 55 different dialogues, essentially what Vacchagotta is asking is about what were called the 10 speculative views. So in his time, the Buddha's time, there was a set of 10 questions or 10 principles that it seems most spiritual teachers were expected to have some kind of position on. Okay, in your philosophy, what do you adhere to? What's your take on these particular areas? And so every philosopher, every spiritual teacher, it seemed to be, by the implication of the suttas and the stories, that every spiritual teacher was expected to have some sort of view on each of those 10 points, and that they would argue why they were right and why other people were wrong. And so these 10 speculative views, or 10 sort of religious opinions, were: is the world eternal? Is it not eternal? Is the world finite, or is say better rather than the world, say the universe? Is the universe eternal, or is it not eternal? Is the universe finite? Is it not finite? Is the Atman and the body, the soul, or the Atman, the Atta, is it the same as the body, or is it separate from the body? Those are the first 6. And then the last four, after death, does an enlightened being exist? Do they not exist? Do they both exist and not exist? And neither exist nor not exist? So I appreciate that English is not the first language of most people here. So it's a little bit hard to follow. Even if English is your first language, it's still hard to follow. But those were the 10 speculative views. So people were if you were a spiritual teacher, you would have your collection of, I agree with this, I agree with that, and this is what I espouse, and you would argue that. So in those 55 suttas, Vacchagotta comes to the Buddha and says, why is it that these 10 speculative views arise? Why do people believe in these, and why do they hold particular perceptions and opinions around these? And in various different ways, the Buddha says, basically because they don't understand the body and the mind. There's a wrong understanding, a wrong appreciation, an incorrect contemplation, incorrect considerations around the world of form, and also feeling, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. So it's like the mind grasping those things in an incorrect way. That's what gives rise to holding on to these particular views and saying, I am right, you're wrong, this is true, everything else is false. So the first of the main questions I thought I'd share with you this afternoon, and I brought my crib sheet along in case I can't remember exactly where these all are. So the first one is in the Anguttara Nikaya, the book of the threes, sutta number 57. So that's, I think, the only encounter between the Buddha and Vacchagotta in that particular part of the Pali canon, in the numerical discourses. And in this, Vacchagotta comes to the Buddha, and he says, it seems like Vacchagotta was kind of roaming around and listening to different teachers and was kind of in this sort of spiritual field, like you find nowadays, many people going to different kinds of retreat, going through spiritual bookshops. You got your shelf is filled with mystical Christianity and Buddhism and Zen and Tibetan Buddhism and Sufi literature and Advaita Vedanta and the whole sort of array of the sort of spiritual smorgasbord, as they say. That it seems like Vacchagotta was kind of cruising around and visiting various different teachers. And so he said, so a lot of these teachers, they say that you claim that only by giving things to you can merit be made. That punya, blessings or merit, only comes from making offerings to you or to your disciples. And that they're going around, and this is a very common view, that this is what you're saying, that if you make offerings to any other teacher or for any other purpose, then there's no merit, there's no blessing, there's no good karma that comes from that. And so I'm curious, what do you say about that? And then the Buddha said, well, the people who say that, they misrepresent me, that they don't say what I say. and in fact, it's so much not the case that even if someone takes some bowl washing water, like a lot of you were helping out with doing the washing up today, thank you very much, everyone who helped. So you say you could take some bowl washing water and you could tip it onto a rubbish heap, or you could pour it into a cesspit, into a sewage pit. And if you have the thought, may this bowl washing water, may this dirty water, may this be of benefit to other living beings, right there you're making punya, right there's merit in that. Even in that a degree of kindness, even that you're thinking about the welfare of other beings. And then he goes on to say, but in terms of degree, if you make offerings to a being who is awakened to some degree, who is someone who is virtuous, someone who is unselfish, someone who is at the various stages of liberation, then the merit that comes from making those offerings is greater. But he makes it clear that any act of kindness, regardless of how you frame it, if it has that wholesome intention, creates good karma along with it. So it's very closely connected to a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses, called the Dakkhina Vibhanga Sutta, the exposition on offerings. And then in that sutta 142, if you're interested, I did my homework for this talk, so don't be too impressed. Again, I couldn't tell you what Sutra 141 is, but 142 is the Dakkhina Vibhanga Sutta. And then in that, the Buddha goes into some detail about the different karmic results that come from, say, making offerings to help an animal, or to help an ordinary human being, or someone who's unvirtuous, someone who's virtuous, someone who's a stream enterer, and so on and so forth. And also, there's another related discourse in the Itivuttaka, Sutta number 26, where the Buddha makes the comment, if you knew, as I know, the results of generosity, you wouldn't even let a meal go past without sharing the food that you have. You would share what you have on your plate with other people if you knew the power of generosity. So don't let the opportunities for sharing and helping others go by. Don't let the opportunities for generosity go by. So again, he underscores it doesn't have to be to an enlightened being. It doesn't have to be with a Buddhist label on it. It's just sharing your food with another is something that is full of blessings and meritorious. So then he goes on to extend the picture a little bit, and he says, also, goodness is not defined by what part of society you come from, because again, he lived in a very caste-based society. So you had at the lower end of society, you had the chandalas, the people who were sort of looking after corpses, or people who are in what are called the scheduled caste, or the Dalit community in India today, who are at the bottom of society. Then you have the Sudras, the workers, and the Vaishyas, the merchants, and then the Brahmins and the warrior nobles. And so that there would be this idea that the people down at the lower end of society, the chandalas and the Dalit people, the kind of lower end of society, that it's not very good karma to be helping out those kind of people, but it's much more important to be making support, giving support, or being associated with people at the top end of society. That's far more prestigious or filled with goodness. And he said it's wrong. That's a completely mistaken view. And he uses this beautiful image. He said, just as if you're a farmer and you need to plow your field, it doesn't matter whether the ox that you're using to plow your field, whether it's got a brown coat or a black coat or a white coat or a pigeon-colored coat with grey or white or spotted. It doesn't matter. You just need the ox to help plow the field. So in exactly the same way, it doesn't matter whether someone is fair-skinned or dark-skinned, or they're a chandala or a brahmin or a vaishya or a kshatriya, a warrior noble. It makes no difference. Goodness is the same everywhere. So it's another of the instances where he's underscoring his very egalitarian attitude towards life, and how he was trying to work against that sense of division by caste, but rather seeing that what makes a difference is our virtue, our goodness, our kindness, and that's what makes a difference in our life regardless of where we come from. So then the second encounter between Vacchagotta and the Buddha, again, Vacchagotta's been hanging out with a lot of other spiritual teachers, and he's been spending time in this place called the debate hall. Actually, the Pali word means something like the hall of confusion, or the hall of kind of noisy busyness. So it's a bit of a derogatory term, but it's where the wanderers of other sects would gather and debate their philosophies. A debating hall is a polite term for it. So he said, well, I was in this debating hall, and then all of these different teachers, they have their take on where beings are reborn. So they would say, oh, this person has died, they've been reborn here, and this one has died and they've been reborn there. And everyone has their own sort of well-formed ideas about where people have been reborn. And also, you are reported as saying the same kind of thing, that such a one has passed away and has been reborn here or there, in this realm or that realm. But I'm perplexed, I'm confused, because I've also heard it said that when asked about people who have reached enlightenment, who have reached the highest kind of attainment, you don't say they've been reborn anywhere. That's different from everybody else. You just say, such a one has reached the end of suffering, or has ended suffering. I'm perplexed. I can't understand this because everyone else is saying that these beings are reborn in different places, gone to this heaven or that heaven, or this realm or that realm. But it's being said that you don't say that. Is that true? Because I'm confused about this. Then the Buddha said, it is appropriate that you are perplexed because this is a perplexing subject. You're right to be confused. So, and again, that's a helpful angle on things. That just because we're in doubt, it doesn't mean that doubt is a problem. And that the Buddha uses that phrase quite often. You doubt that which should be doubted. Oh, right. So rather than that questioning or that uncertainty being an obstruction or a problem, it's actually in a way, a representation of truth. So when the Buddha met the Kalamas in the famous Kalama Sutta, and they were saying, different spiritual teachers come through our village and they say this is true and that everything else is wrong, and we don't know who to believe. We're perplexed. The Buddha again said, "You are perplexed because you are dealing with a perplexing subject. So it's appropriate that you feel confused, perplexed." So anyway, in this dialogue with the Buddha, then the Buddha responds to Vacchagotta by saying, I talk about the reappearance of beings where there is fuel. When there is no fuel, then I don't talk about reappearance. I don't talk about them being reborn. And it's interesting in this discourse because the word for fuel, upadana, like fuel for a fire, like wood or petrol or whatever, that's fuel. Upadana is exactly the same word as the word for clinging, yatur, kwam yatur. It's the same word. It's not just like written in the same way, but with a different meaning. It's actually the same word. So the word for fuel and the word for clinging is the same word, upadana. So this whole dialogue hinges around that. So the Buddha said, well, for one where there is fuel, I talk about rebirth. If there's no fuel, then there's no rebirth. And Vacchagotta says, I'm still confused. And then the Buddha said, well, it's like with a fire. If there's fuel, then the fire will keep burning. If there's no fuel, then the fire won't keep burning. And so for a being, if there is fuel for rebirth, if there's the basis for rebirth, then they will be reborn. If there's no fuel, if there's no basis, there's no causes and conditions for rebirth, then they're not reborn. Then Vacchagotta says, well, so then it can move the conversation on a bit. So he said, well, like in a forest fire, when flames leap from one tree to another, what is it that sustains that fire when it goes from one tree to another? When a fire leaps across a distance, and the Buddha says it is fueled by the wind. And then he said, well, in the case of a being, then when one life has come to an end and before the next life has begun, then what is it that sustains a being? What is the fuel for a being when one life has come to an end and before the next birth is realized? What is the fuel? And the Buddha says, craving, tanupadana. Craving is the fuel in that case. So this is also one of the instances where people often ask about birth and death and what the Buddha's teachings are on this, or is this addressed? Because, say, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they talk about the bardo states, like when one life comes to an end and before the next life begins, there are these intermediary states, and people say, do we have the same thing in the Theravada world? And so this is one of the instances where that's talked about very clearly, that there is a kind of what they call an antarabhava, or an intermediary state, when one life has come to an end and before the next life has begun. So those people who really don't like the idea of past lives and future lives, and they love Buddha Dhamma, and they think meditation is wonderful and Buddhism is the greatest thing ever, but they don't like past lives and future lives as a concept, this is a bit indigestible. But it's there in the canon. So it's also kind of interesting that in the Bhikkhu Bodhi's footnote on this, in the Connected Discourses, he says, actually, the Buddha's words goes against what Theravada orthodoxy says. So the later commentators' description of this area doesn't match what the Buddha says. So the later commentators, people who wrote books like the Visuddhimagga, they had to struggle to fit the Buddha's words into their own version of the philosophy. So that in this is one of the instances where the religion, the words of the founder are kind of problematic for the people who developed the religious teaching. That's another area of discussion. But so this is an interesting part of the dialogue, is the Buddha talks to Vacchagotta about how this process works, and also that the nature of an enlightened being, and that they're not reborn. And so again, within his own time, that would be kind of weird, because most spiritual teachers would say, if you're enlightened, if you've reached total liberation, then you're going to go to some really super duper heaven. You're going to become one with Brahman. You're going to be in this sort of fantastic, blissful, permanent heavenly state. But what the Buddha said was very, very different. He would just say, such a one is not reborn. And so that he was frequently misunderstood as being what they call a nihilist, or talking about annihilation, then talking about no rebirth. It's like, so they're just wiped out? That's just, after all that effort, well, spiritual work and that great realization, you just you just get unplugged, and you're just like a sort of a TV with a broken tube. That's it. The Buddha said, no, that's not what I teach. But he was frequently misunderstood in that way. So again, this dialogue with Vacchagotta represents Vacchagotta kind of trying to figure things out and to see how it works. So this was still perplexing, and the Buddha doesn't explain a lot more. So in all of these dialogues, they just end, and then Vacchagotta goes off and continues his wanderings. So the next one is even more acute. And this is one of the famous, it's not exactly a dialogue, because what happens is Vacchagotta is still trying to figure out these spiritual principles. So he comes to the Buddha and he said, is there a self? And the Buddha doesn't answer. He remains silent. This is one of those, the question that doesn't get an answer modes. So he said, is there a self? The Buddha remains silent. Vacchagotta goes, is there no self? The Buddha remains silent. Okay, so then Vacchagotta pays his respects and then departs. So then, so this is one of the most famous silent teachings, one of the most famous silences in religious history. So then, after Vacchagotta had gone, then Venerable Ananda asked the Buddha, Venerable Sir, what was the cause? What was the reason why, when Vacchagotta asked you about whether there's a self or no self, you didn't reply? And the Buddha said, well, if when he asked me the question, is there a self, I had said, yes, there is a self, how would that have meshed? Would that have been in accordance with my regular teachings that all Dhammas are not self? That would be siding with those who are eternalists, who talk about a permanent eternal self. So that would have gone against a lot of the other things that I teach. So that would be, I would be contradicting myself. And then if, when he asked, is there no self? I'd said, yes, there is no self. Then I would have been siding with the nihilists, the annihilationists, and also then he would have had the feeling, well, I had a self when I came here, and now the master tells me I haven't got one. So he would have gone away even more confused than when he arrived. So the best thing was to remain silent. There's a lot more that could be said about that, but that is also represents the way that the Buddha again didn't feel like he had to explain everything. He was quite okay with allowing people to misunderstand or to not try to clarify absolutely everything. But he was not wanting people to keep suffering, but he would be discerning about how he dealt with each situation. And so sometimes other places in the canon where it's many different encounters where somebody has misunderstood the Buddha, and then they sort of hang on to their misunderstanding. It's interesting that the Buddha does not intervene to say, well, actually, you've got that wrong. But if someone gets an incorrect image, a few times he lets them consciously lets them misunderstand it, and lets them sort of go on their way. A famous incident of that is where he and an attendant monk are walking along the road. They're heading towards Rajagaha. Just the two of them, the Buddha and his attendant, are walking through the countryside. And they get to a fork in the road. And then the Buddha takes the left-hand fork. And his attendant said, Venerable Sir, we're on our way to Rajagaha. The road to the right is the road to Rajagaha. And the Buddha said, this is the road to Rajagaha. And so his attendant, of course this is a Buddhist story, so they say these things 3 times over. The attendant said, Venerable Sir, I know this road very well. This is the road to Rajagaha. And Buddha said, this is the way we need to go to Rajagaha. We go this way. And so then after the 3rd time, the attendant monk says, well, Venerable Sir, it's up to you, but I'm going to Rajagaha. Here's your bowl. So, you're traveling with a fully enlightened, self-awakened Buddha who's got a high degree of wisdom and great psychic powers. But yet you think, I know better than he does. Here's your bowl, I'm going this way. And so what happened then, a little distance down the road, then that monk got attacked by robbers, got beaten up, got his bowl broken, and then dragged himself back through the countryside to rejoin the Buddha. Okay. I realized why that left-hand road was the road to Rajagaha. But the Buddha didn't stop and say, I'm telling you this because there's some robbers down the road who are going to attack us if we go that way. He just let the monk follow his own obstinacy, his own rightness, and then get beaten up. So the Buddha didn't want him to be hurt, but he allowed him to walk into that so that he would learn a memorable lesson. So to continue, so then the next of the questions of Vacchagotta is about omniscience. Omniscience means knowing everything. And interestingly enough, so you might think the Buddha's getting, this person's coming to see him all the time, and the Buddha might be thinking, oh, it's Vacchagotta again, Well, I wonder what it'll be this time. But this is a very interesting little detail of this sutta, is the Buddha goes to see Vacchagotta. So the Buddha it's just before dawn. He's staying near Vesali, and he has the thought, oh, it's too early to go into Vesali for alms. Vacchagotta is staying at the single lotus mango tree park of the wanderers. Why not go to visit Vacchagotta in the park? So the Buddha actually went to go and visit him. So that's pretty unique. That kind of thing doesn't often happen. So he went to the park and met with Vacchagotta. Vacchagotta pays his respects and says, Venerable Sir, I've got a question for you. Because these other wanderers, there's a lot of them that say you claim to be omniscient. That whether you're walking or standing, whether you're asleep or awake, you're continuously aware of everything in the universe. And they say that's what you claim, that you are omniscient, that you know everything at all times. And so, is it the case that you claim that or not? And again, this is a helpful instance where the Buddha clarifies that. He said, "No, I don't claim that. That's impossible. But I do claim to have realized the 3 true knowledges." This is called the Tevijja Vacchagotta Sutta, the Vacchagotta and the 3 knowledges. So this is Sutta number 71 in the Middle Length Discourses. And so the Buddha said, the 3 knowledges is what I have realized. So I have psychic powers. I can recollect all my past lives. If I bring my attention to it, I can recollect the many, many past lives. I can look into the lives and the karmic streams of other beings. I can see the karmic history and background of other beings. I can see that and know that. And also I have fully liberated the heart from greed, hatred, and delusion. So those are the 3 true knowledges, and those I have accomplished and fully realized, but I don't make a claim to be omniscient. And so at the end of that discourse, you finally get a comment of saying that Vacchagotta was satisfied and delighted with the Blessed One's words, with the Buddha's words. So over there's many sequence of encounters and engagements and discussions, as sort of faith is steadily arising in Vacchagotta, but he's still got a lot of questions, still got a lot of doubts. So then the next one that I want to cover, which is kind of the central teaching that is, I feel, really valuable in all of this. Again, Vacchagotta is going around and around with respect to these 10 speculative views and these philosophical questions. And so he comes to the Buddha and says, Venerable Sir, there are these 10 speculative views, these 10 views, and so what is your view about whether the universe is it eternal or is it not eternal? Is the universe finite or is it infinite? And so on and so forth. With all of those 10, if you remember. Then is the Atman and the body one? Are they separate or are they conjoined? Does an enlightened being exist after death? Not exist after death? Both exist and not exist, and neither exist nor not exist after death. And to each of those 10, the Buddha says, I do not hold that view. So then Vacchagotta says, well, so how is it? I mean, how can you not have a view about any of those? Because that kind of covers the whole spiritual map. That's what everyone else talks about all the time, and it's significant to everyone. How can you not hold a view? And then the Buddha then explains, said, speculative view, that kind of ditthi, is something with which the Tathagata, the Buddha, has nothing whatsoever to do. The Tathagata, the Buddha, the awake mind, if you like, it does not engage in that kind of speculative views. So that views, those kind of views, they are what he calls the thicket of views, a tangle, like a bramble patch of views, the contortion of views. It's a whole area that's necessarily spiky, confused, frustrating, difficult, and painful. And so that's all built around the habits of thinking in terms of self, of conceiving I believe, I don't believe, I have, I don't have. It's all around conceiving the whole massive habit of I-making and mind-making. So the Tathagata, seeing that this is all just the painfulness of conceiving a self, an I, a me, a mine, what's called I-making, ahankara, mind-making, mamankara. The Tathagata is therefore completely let go of all of that. The Tathagata is not identified, does not identify with any of that. That has completely let go of that whole domain, does not engage. So in a way, the awake heart, the wise heart, does not engage, does not give value to any of those kind of self-based opinions and views. So then Vacchagotta asks, so such a one who has let go of everything, who has reached this kind of spiritual completion, so after death, do they reappear in another realm? The Buddha says, and then the Buddha says, reappears does not apply. Then Vacchagotta says, okay, do they not reappear in another? Do they not reappear in another realm? And the Buddha says, not reappear does not apply. Okay, do they neither reappear nor not reappear in another realm? That doesn't apply. Do they both reappear and not reappear? That doesn't apply either. And then Vaccha's, oh my God, I'm really confused, because there's got to be something that happens. I mean, I know you said that when they run out of fuel that they don't get reborn, but one of those four, I mean, that surely that covers everything. Really, it must do. So then the Buddha gives this wonderful simile about fire. He said, okay, Vaccha. So say we had a fire burning here, made out of grass and sticks. And this fire is burning in front of us. And then we let the fire go out. And I ask you the question, where did the fire go? North, south, east, or west? How would you reply? And then Vacchagotta says, well, I would reply that the question is irrelevant. The question doesn't apply because it didn't go north, south, east, or west. It just went out. And the Buddha said, exactly. The way you put the question presumes a reality that does not exist. Reappears does not apply, does not reappear does not apply, both reappears and does not reappear does not apply, neither reappears nor does not reappear, does not apply. So then he goes on to explain, and this is a teaching I reflect on a lot, and I find is very powerful, because he then goes on to speak about his own subjective experience, the Buddha's, in a way, his own vision of his own experiential reality, and so in this passage, then he talks about the Tathagata, but in terms of our own life and our own meditation, is also referring to the awake, aware quality of your own mind, your own heart. That when there is satipanya, when there's mindfulness and wisdom, this is how the heart sees things. So then what the Buddha says to Vajragota is, that material form, that rupa, whereby someone trying to describe the Tathagata, if you're trying to describe the Buddha in terms of a body, in terms of rupa, that has been cut off at the root, made like a palm tree stump, deprived of the conditions for existence, and been rendered incapable of arising in the future. The Tathagata is liberated from being reckoned in terms of material form, Vacha. He is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the great ocean. Then it's the same with the rest of the five khandhas. So that feeling, that Vedana, that sensation, whereby one trying to describe the Tathagata would describe him, that has been cut off at the root, made like a palm tree stump, and so forth. So for rupa, for material form, for sensation, Vedana, feeling, for perceptions, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, for mental formations, thinking, imagination, memory, volition, intention, emotion, profound blissful mind states, the whole array of mental states, and then the cognizing faculty of mind itself, what we call the five khandhas. So every aspect of the conditioned body and mind. So whatever way you would describe the Buddha, saying the Buddha is from Nepal, or the Buddha is wise, or the Buddha is filled with compassion, or the Buddha lived 2,500 years ago. The Buddha is my teacher. All of those ways that we would describe the Buddha, or that quality of wakeful awareness, then from the Buddha's side, from the side of the Tathagata, from the side of the knowing mind, that has been cut off at the root, made like a palm tree stump, deprived of the conditions for existence, and rendered incapable of arising in the future. So, like, the bridge is down. There's no connection. So even though the Buddha is sitting there talking, and there's a body, and there's speech, and there's seeing, and there's engaging, then he's saying at that very moment, that quality of wakeful awareness is completely unidentified and unattached to the body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, language, memory, and so on and so forth, even as he's using the body and thoughts and language and memory and engaging very heartfully with Vajragota. And in that respect, that last little passage, he says the Tathagata is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the great ocean. So what this is, when Vajragota was asking about, is there a self or is there no self, or the very, very common experience in looking at Buddhist teachings is, well, if everything is anatta, if all dhammas are not self, who is it that gets reborn? If everything is not self, how does this work? So this is one of the places where that I feel is the clearest expression in the Pali Canon where that's being talked about. Because what it's saying is the normal ways that we describe ourselves, being a woman, being a man, being British, being Thai, being American, being Japanese, being old, being young, being healthy, being sick, being tall, being short, being employed, being unemployed, being retired, being a child, being an adult. The 10,000 ways we describe ourselves, that none of those are really who and what we are. That's all not self, anatta. But then that last little collection of qualities, the Tathagata, that awake, aware quality, is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the great ocean. So there's something there, but it can't be described or reckoned in our ordinary everyday terms of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. It can't be described in human terms. So the Buddha avoided language like, well, the real self is, or what, or what you really are. That he chose to not use self language at all. So he just said anatta. And so he was often misunderstood, which gave rise to many, many questions. And people thought he was a nihilist, or was saying that there is a, so you believe in not self. But that dialogue, when Vajragota comes to ask the Buddha, is there no self? The Buddha, if you notice, does not reply. He doesn't say, correct, there is no self. And if you look through the Pali Canon, there's absolutely no place in the Pali Canon where you can find the Buddha saying there is no self. Not once. Many times he says, Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, all Dhammas, all phenomena, the conditioned and the unconditioned are not self. But he doesn't ever take the philosophical position that there is no self. So again, if English is not your first language, you might think, no self, not self, same, huh? But it's worthy of reflection. And there's a very interesting essay written by Venerable Thanissaro called No Self or Not Self, that Ajahn Pasno and I printed the whole thing in our book about Nibbana called The Island. And that spells it out very, very clearly, I feel. How the principle of not self is a way of, it's like a meditation method, looking at, exploring the feelings of I and me and mine, how they arise in our experience. Whereas no self is more like an idea that you're hanging on to, or that you argue about, or you believe in, or you don't believe in. But not self is more like a method. No self is more like a view and opinion. Does that make sense? So the not self is a way of exploring your thoughts, your memories, your emotions, your opinions, your body, your self creating habits. So this dialogue with Vajragota, then he's suitably impressed and says, "This is wonderful. This is amazing. This is magnificent. Please, may I become your disciple? And I want to be considered. I want to go to refuge for you as a layperson for life." So he's had several hundred conversations with the Buddha already, and finally he's ready to let go of his adherence to a different spiritual group and say, "Okay, I'm leaving my old path behind. I want to be your student." So it's taken him a long time, but he got there eventually. And then the last encounter is called the Mahavajragota Sutta, the Great Discourse to Vajragota. And interestingly enough, the teaching that the Buddha gives is very, very simple. So again, Vajragota comes to him and says to the Buddha, "We've had conversations together for a long time. Like, you know me very well." And also, it seems that the Buddha was he was very friendly towards Vajragota. He never criticizes him or says, "Foolish man, how can you think that?" And the very fact the Buddha actually went to go and visit him one day. The Buddha didn't pay that many calls on people. That was very rare. So there seems to be quite a sort of warm connection between the two of them. And in this final encounter, then Vajragota just says, "Okay, we've had conversations for a long time, and you can either speak to me in brief or in detail, but can you just describe to me the difference between the wholesome and the unwholesome?" So very, very simple, direct teaching. And this is where the Buddha gives a straight answer. He says, "Okay, you want the difference between the wholesome and the unwholesome," and then he lists the 10 kusala kammas. So he says, this is the wholesome, refraining from killing, refraining from stealing, refraining from sexual misconduct, and what are called the 10 kusala kammas, or the 10 wholesome actions. And then the unwholesome is the 10 akusala kamma. And so it's a very simple teaching. It's a kind of teaching that's given many other places. But at the end of it, then Vajragota, his faith is by this time, his doubts have been sort of pushed off the map, and his faith really overflows. And he says, "This is amazing. This is wonderful. Your teachings are so profound. is it the case that you are the only enlightened being that your teachings are so wise, so profound, so wonderful? Are you the only enlightened one? And the Buddha said, no. There's many hundreds of the monks, the nuns, the bhikkhus, the bhikkhunis, many hundreds who have also been become arahants. And then amongst the lay disciples, there's many of the hundreds, thousands of the lay disciples who have realized the different stages of liberation. And so at the end of that, Vajragota says, this is amazing, you have so many awakened disciples and your teaching is so profound. It's like the whole of your dispensation, the whole of your teaching, it inclines towards Nibbana, like the Ganges River inclines towards the sea. So too, all of your teachings and your disciples, they incline, they slope, they tend towards Nibbana. And please, Venerable Sir, may I become a monk with you? So the Buddha says, well, Vajragota, you've been an adherent to a different group. You've been part of a different spiritual sect for a long time. So normally, if one is leaving a different group and joining my sangha, you have to have 4 months probation before you're accepted. And he said, 4 months? I'll do 4 years. I don't care how long it takes. I want to be your disciple. I want to be a monk with you. And so the Buddha then, of course, gives him the ordination straight away. Seemingly he didn't have to wait at all. And then he goes off, and within 2 weeks he's realized the level of anagami, or non-returner. He goes to the Buddha, asks for more instruction, and the Buddha said, again, you have to read the text a little closely, but the Buddha says, basically, Vajragota, you've got a lot of paramita already. He said, you just have to think, may I develop the psychic powers? And they're going to be there. You just have to think, may I develop these spiritual accomplishments? And they're going to be right there. That you don't have to doesn't have to be delayed in time. It's like your bank account is really full. You've got a lot of spiritual backup there. You just have to direct your attention in that way, and these qualities will be realized, including the ending of greed, hatred, and delusion, and the realization of completing the path. And so Vajragota went away, and in no long time became one of the arahants. And so comes at the end of the Mahavajragota Sutta. So it's kind of interesting that even though he had so many questions, and was obviously quite a talkative and inquisitive person, there are no discourses in the Pali Canon given by Vajragota. So quite a number of the enlightened disciples, you have suttas, Dhamma talks that they gave. There aren't any Vajragota suttas, none that were recorded anyway. And in the Thera Gatha, the verses of the enlightened elders, you think, oh, the Vajragota story is going to be quite complex and colourful, but it's just a single verse. It's very, very short. It doesn't say much at all. So really, all we have of that domain is there in these dialogues between Vajragota. But it does show a progression, the sort of faithful inquirer, or the wonderful English word indefatigable, like one who doesn't let anything get in the way, that is tireless, that keeps on going. So even though Vajragota had a lot of doubts and a lot of questions, he kept coming back, he kept going, and even though it took a long time for him to really establish himself in faith and to go forth, then along the way he obviously developed a huge amount of spiritual capacities, and so it didn't take him long to reach enlightenment. And that particularly I found very touching, how the Buddha says, you just have to think, may I develop these powers, or you just have to think, may I realize the end of greed, hatred, and delusion, and it's going to be there. So that it's like, you've got the cash in the bank, you just have to punch in the number, and it's all there. You don't have to develop very much more. And so that another way I find this encouraging or useful area is that we can think, I've got so many questions, I've got so many doubts, so there's so much I don't understand, that because your attention can be caught by the things that you think you don't understand, or what seems to be incomplete, you can, like Vajragota, have along the way developed a huge amount of spiritual qualities, very worthy and important, valuable spiritual skills. But if you're not putting your attention, it's like having a bank account that you're not aware is there, that's been piling up interest, compound interest for the last 30 years. So, oh my goodness, I'm really rich. wow, how did that happen? And so that we sometimes have resources we don't realize. So maybe just to share a little story just before we finish at 3:00 on that score. So my mother, her parents, my grandparents, were quite wealthy, but my mother was very obstinate, so she would never accept any money from her parents. So we grew up quite poor, which I don't resent at all. It's very helpful in many ways. But what they did do is that my grandfather managed to persuade her to get some stocks and shares. And so that when I was growing up as a kid, because my father had almost no income at all, we kind of lived a lot on the sort of trickle of dividends from my mother's stocks and shares. So one day, and so these are sort of sat there, and she didn't really do very much with it, except felt happy when an envelope arrived with a check in. So one day this telephone call came, and this man said, "I'm the managing director of Rank Hovis McDougall. We're having a shareholders meeting, and we want you to we want to know how you're going to vote." She said, "What kind of idiot do you think I am? What are you selling?" And she thought it was some kind of a scam over the phone. And he said, "No, Mrs. Horner, I am actually the managing director of Rank Hovis McDougall. This, and Allied British Foods, our kind of parent company, is some a company that you've had shares in, and Rank Hovis McDougall for many decades, and you are one of our major shareholders. What are you talking about? Who do you think you are? What kind of idiot do you think I am?" And it took him quite a long time to actually persuade my mother, when he started reading out the numbers of shares that she had. Oh, really? She hadn't really kept an eye on things, but she had become quite a major shareholder without realizing it. She was just sort of happy to get a check through so that the family could keep the wolf from the door. And so that he said, "Yeah, well, we need to know how you're going to vote at the shareholders meeting." So anyway, that was just an illustration for my family that, not that we suddenly became very rich, but it did make my mother feel a bit more comfortable. that the paramita that we develop by training the mind in meditation, by acts of kindness and goodness, acts of generosity, just as we're saying about pouring the dishwashing water away and saying, "May living beings down the line be benefited from this." That all builds the paramita, the spiritual virtues that we have as human beings, but we can be oblivious of that. We can not pay attention. We can not recognize that because we're so busy paying attention to the bits that are missing, or the things that are wrong with me, or the things that I feel unhappy about, and we can forget that there can be this spiritual richness in the mix as well. So that's on that final note, I'd like to just offer these thoughts for consideration.
What's the difference between an enlightened person and or a Buddha?
I'll give you a straight answer. Okay. So the Buddha was an arahant, so he was one of the enlightened beings. So the difference between a Buddha and if you can use the term a regular arahant, is that a Buddha has developed the full range of spiritual abilities. So there are two different kinds of a Buddha. There is the Pacceka Buddha, or a solitary Buddha, who doesn't establish a sangha or a spiritual tradition. And then there is Sammasambuddha, or a perfectly self-awakened Buddha who establishes a sangha. So the quality of an arahant it's describing the heart, the mind that is completely freed from greed, hatred, and delusion. So there can be that freedom from greed, hatred, and delusion without there being a range of particular psychic powers or abilities to teach, or the range of skills that the Buddha had. So we have this, what are called the 10 paramitas, the 10 spiritual qualities, so that it's said that for someone to realize Buddhahood, they have to have developed all of those 10 paramitas. So and these are generosity, virtue, renunciation, energy, wisdom, honesty, resolution, patience, equanimity, and kindness to the fullest extent possible. So that's an arahant might not be able to teach very well, or might not have any psychic powers, but there's still the heart is freed from greed, hatred, and delusion. So, for example, Venerable Sariputta, the Buddha's chief disciple, he was very accomplished as a meditator, but he had no psychic powers whatsoever. And then Venerable Mahamoggallana, the Buddha's second disciple, he was very, very gifted in psychic powers, but he was not a very good Dhamma teacher. So there are almost no Mahamoggallana suttas in the Pali Canon, whereas lots and lots of Sariputta ones.
So what makes a Buddha become a Buddha then, as opposed to being an enlightened person?
The intention to, say, develop the spiritual faculties to the greatest degree possible.
Thank you.
So, any other questions? So please, this one up here in the front. Siddhanta's getting some good exercise this afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ajahn. I've been wondering for a while what the significance and benefits and considerations for the moon and the full moons, the new moons, and how they impact on our practice.
And that's got what to do with the... It's just
The
a
talk.
question.
Another question altogether, I apologise.
It's very simple. That's how people measured the week in the Buddha's time. The 7-day week is a kind of modern invention. And that for thousands of years, people just used the moon to measure the flow of activities across many different cultures all around the world, because the moon is changing its shape, same everywhere on the planet. And so the moon going from completely dark to full and being a half circle halfway along, that's how people, as they measured the flow of their days. And so that in the suttas you have the Buddha considering, because people would have a sort of a lunar observance day, that it was just a custom. People would have like a holy day or a Sabbath day on the new moon, the full moon, and the 2 half moons. And there's the Buddha then considers, well, we have these observance days, so what would it be good for the lay people to do on these days in order to be of benefit to them? So it comes across from the narrative that it was just okay, we've got this 7-day week, everyone has to stop work on Sundays, how do we use the time? And so it was really just a convenient way of measuring the flow of days, because as a human family, we realized a long time ago that it's good to have a break and to just sort of stop the normal flow of activity. Probably once we stopped having to protect ourselves or hunt for food every day, and we got more settled into villages and towns and became more of a civilized, in the literal meaning of the term, or urbanized, then the idea of a rest day or a Sabbath day became more normal. I don't think you have that so much in hunter-gatherer tribes in the same way, but I think it's just a product of settled life. And then it's part of our traditional customs is that the significant events of the Buddha's life, his birth, the enlightenment, and his final passing away, all took place on full moon days. So then they became but I think that's probably also the people were having a full moon observance ceremony anyhow, so they take those days as days to recollect those qualities of the Buddha. So the Visakha Puja celebrates all those three: in May, the full moon of May, the birth, the enlightenment, and the final passing away is all in May. The full moon of July is 2 months later, 2 months after the enlightenment. He gave the first teaching, and then The other main festival of our year is in February, Magha Puja, when there was a spontaneous gathering of 1,250 arahants. So, do we have any questions relating to today's theme? Not to be too different. Yeah, front row, yeah. And then second one afterwards, yeah.
Thank you very much for the very interesting Dhamma talk, Ajahn. I have a question. You might decide not to answer this one as the Lord Buddha did, but anyway, I asked the question. You mentioned about the Antarabhava, intermediary person. In Sri Lanka, we believe there's 7 days in between those two, but some other scholarly monks have said that there is no such thing. As soon as you die here, you'll be reborn again. What is your opinion about that? Thank you.
My opinion is that I took note of, when I was reading these suttas during the last week, that Bhikkhu Bodhi points out that the Theravada orthodoxy disagrees with the Buddha. That in the Theravada sort of orthodoxy, the texts like Visuddhimagga and such like, they say, one life comes to an end and there's an immediate rebirth in a different realm, and there's no antarabhava, there's no intermediary states. So the word of the Buddha, but it's kind of interesting that somehow they've managed to have it clear in the Pali Canon that that's what is talked about. And then the commentators later on say, that's not what he meant. But that often happens where the commentators take an original principle and then they sort of make it all fit their own particular model. And so bits get chopped off or bits get stretched out and added on to make it fit the neat conceptual model of the commentators. But that's by no means that sutta, which is... that's in the section of the Samyutta Nikaya called the Undeclared, section 44, sutta number 9, if you're interested. I did my homework, so I got it written down as well. So it's not the only instance where that's mentioned. There's another discourse where actually the note from Bhikkhu Bodhi says a similar thing. In the Book of the Sevens, in the Anguttara Nikaya, it's sutta number 55, and it talks about the various different kinds of anagami, and the speed with which anagamis become, people who have reached that level of non-returner, the speed with which they realize full enlightenment. And there is the expression "enlightened in the interval" is used several times in that sutta. And it's like that a being is described as one life coming to an end, and there's an interval, an antarabhava, before the next life begins, and also in a very matter-of-fact way. And again, in Bhikkhu Bodhi's note to that particular passage, if you want to look it up, in the Anguttara Nikaya, numerical discourses, he says, yeah, this goes against Theravada orthodoxy. So my personal perspective of it, and also the way that, say, in Thailand, people sometimes you get forest ajahns who make a lot of that domain of past lives and future lives, and that. Ajahn Chah tended not to. He didn't talk about that area very much at all. He didn't dismiss it as being incorrect or false, but he just would try to get people to focus on this life, what you could do now to make a difference, because people are very prone to thinking in terms of being reborn in the future, like all my problems come from something I did in a past life, rather than some stupid choices you made 5 years ago. It's always like, it's a past life, that's to blame, and he'll say, well, it's probably a lot closer to home. And similarly, people, it would be very common that people would say, I want to be reborn in the time of the Maitreya Buddha in the future, because it'll be really easy to be enlightened when the next Buddha comes along. Yeah, everyone knows, quote unquote, it's really easy to be enlightened if you get to be near a Buddha. And so they would talk about literally, deliberately delaying their development of insight and trying to make enough merit to be reborn exactly when the next Buddha comes along. And Luang Por Chah, he could be pretty funny. He'd say, "Are you a gambler? You know, how lucky are you on the dice table? You know, when did you last win the lottery? You know." Because it's like, he said, you know, rather than putting your attention into that, it's far more useful to pay attention to what you're doing now with your mind. So he didn't, he tried to emphasize that side of things for people, but when people would ask, or there would be the, you know, situations where someone would ask that, then what would be said would be things like, it's not a fixed thing, that one life might end and it might be immediately reborn in another life, or there might be some kind of long period, but it's certainly not fixed to 7 days. In the Northern Buddhist tradition, they often talk about 49 days, that it's like the bardo, between ending of a human life and then the next birth. That, I believe, in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, that's sort of fixed at 49 days. But my own feeling, and that's having heard various different ajahns and others talking about it, is it's not a fixed thing. It can be immediate, or or the mind can be stuck in some kind of unfixed intermediary state for a long, long time, and sometimes when you have exorcisms, or someone saying, "Oh, you know, I keep dreaming of my sister who died in a car crash. She looks lost. It's what's happening," and so then those kind of things from time to time come up, and then. The way it's talked about is, well, that the consciousness, the person doesn't realize they've died. They're still, they don't know that their life has come to an end, so they're in a confused. The consciousness is stuck in a formless, an unformed state, and it's so. Then there will be some kind of encouragement to be dedicating practice to that person, or carrying out particular practices like taking the precepts or doing a meditation and dedicating punya for that person to move on to a different destination. The only time I know Ajahn Chah to have spoken about rebirth in a very direct way, which is it's a bit of a unique situation, but he said there was a monk who disrobed when he was in his late 80s, and he got married to a 16-year-old girl. And he died on the marriage bed, and he was reborn as the child in his wife's womb. And that's the only instance that I know of. Ajahn Chah actually spoke about that. And I think it was in the context of old men can be really stupid. Yes. But I wasn't actually there when that conversation took place, but he generally, you know, he tried to steer the attention towards what's tangible and meaningful for us in our everyday life, and so that whole, what you can call metaphysical dimension, he didn't speak about so much, but the model that is there in that discourse, the dialogue between Vajragota and the Buddha, that makes perfect sense to me. And so I've quoted that dozens of times over the years. And so that craving is the fuel. Because people ask that question, what gets reborn? If all dhammas are not self, what gets reborn? And I say, the short answer, habits. Whatever the mind is, what it loves, what it hates, its opinions, its fears, what's familiar, the smells, the textures, the sounds that it identifies with, and whatever it hates, whatever it loves, whatever is familiar, that's whatever it's attached to, that'll condition where it reappears. Just as what was your favorite food yesterday, when you wake up in the morning, it's probably your favorite food the next day as well. Anyway, another question from
you've answered quite a bit of it already, to be honest. So I'm still going to concentrate on the same thing. Is there a difference between reincarnation and rebirth, is the first thing? Because people use the different... And also, is there much difference between the Hindu view of reincarnation and the Buddhist view of rebirth? Or does it vary according to which Buddhist school you're in? Are you probably... I mean, it's a bit of a grand question, but...
No, it's a good question. and you're not the first person to ask this. So again, to give you a straight answer, I told you I was very prone to giving straight answers. So yeah, rebirth, it kind of depends who you talk to, but the sort of stock descriptions are rebirth. The Pali word for rebirth is punabhava, which literally means again becoming. So the English term force of habit I think is an ideal way of describing that, force of habit. So reincarnation literally is built around the idea that there is this Atman, this little bubble of I-ness, this sort of pure soul thing that has somehow in the immeasurable ancient past got separated out from Brahman, the Godhead, and is now this independent individual soul. And the spiritual journey is that Atman getting born again and again and again in different bodies until finally, through spiritual development, it gets reunited with the Brahman. There's obviously a huge, well not obviously, but there's a huge range of nuances to that, different expressions, but roughly over the Vedic model. So reincarnation is the idea there is this independent soul, this distinct bubble of me-ness that goes and inhabits different bodies. And that bubble of me-ness goes from one place to another. And the Buddha said that's not how it works. That speaking in those terms of that there is this I, this Atman. So the word Atman in Sanskrit, Atta in Pali is the same word. So that then when he's asked the question by Vacchagotta, does the self exist? The word would be Atta. Does the Atta exist? And then he remains silent. And then says, is there no Atta? And he remains silent. And so that the whole conception of an individual bubble of I-ness is something that the Buddha is trying to work against. So with rebirth, what we're talking about is the repetition of habits, the force of habit. And so that it can seem as though there is this individual separate I, but the Buddha, rather than trying to define, so quote unquote, what we really are, he realized that that you're going to keep creating a concept of I-ness and me-ness and minus and attaching to that if you use that language. So he used like a negation method, what they call a via negativa in Latin. So the words of not self, of anatta, that in terms of the body, our sensations, comfort, discomfort, neutral feeling, our perceptions, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, imagining, remembering, emotions, intentions, opinions. These are, when they're examined, you can't find a me that is the owner. There's a feeling of I that is the owner, or a feeling of a me who's making choices, or an I that I am. You have like an owning me, a being me, and a narrative me, my story. I am this person. This is my story. And so the approach of the Buddha was to use what we call insight meditation, or vipassana, to look at those habits of I-making and mind-making, and say, well, if I am thinking, what is it that knows the thought? What is it that owns that? What shape is that owner? Where is it? These different feelings, these different memories. What is this I that is supposed to be the owner, the doer, the actor, the chooser? What shape does it have? Where is it? What is it that knows that? And so on. And so that rather than trying to define what we really are, the method of vipassana, insight, you're using that reflection on not self to keep letting go of what we're not. The habit of saying, well, yes, this is my body, but okay, what's the owner of the body look like? Is that got a shape? Does it have an age, a gender, a nationality? And so it's paring away those habits of attachment, the force of habit. And so that then more and more the heart is freed of those kind of identifications. And it's interesting also that the Scottish philosopher David Hume, in the 18th century, he came to very similar conclusions. That he said, if I look at my mind, I look at my world and my feelings, and I say I think or I feel or I do, but when I look for what it is that's feeling and thinking and doing, I can't find anything there. And so that ability then to let that be open or unformed is part of the practice. So when we talk about enlightenment, and what was puzzling to Vacchagotta about, you say they're not reborn, it's rather like the heart being free of those habits. It takes on different shapes. A sense of, who I was when I was 6 years old is different from how I now am when I'm 60-something, 63. It's different. But there still can be a feeling of I. But what you can find at the root is there's this knowing of this life, of these feelings, of this body, of comfort, discomfort, and memories and ideas and emotions coming and going. So that it takes our life takes different shapes. But that sense of I-ness kind of carries on, driven by the habits of attachment. So when the heart is free of those attachments, then it's not so much that anything is lost. It's just there's all of the addictions and attachments have faded. So just like if you have a wave on the sea coming into the shore, that wave has a shape, and it looks like it's moving through space, coming towards the shore, but it's just a wave of energy moving through the water, right? The actual water is going more in a circular movement, if you understand the sort of physics of waves, and so it looks like it's progressing towards the shore as a sort of solid form. So like our life, our body, it seems like I am this thing, I am this person. But the ending of rebirth is rather like the sea with no waves on it. If you follow that. It's like there's nothing to create waves. The sea is still there, so that you have those words of the Buddha: profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the great ocean. Like just because there's no wave doesn't mean the sea is diminished. Still the sea, and so that the question that you ask about rebirth and reincarnation is very different, because that rebirth is that force of habit, that wave drives rebirth. Like the flame jumping from one tree to another feeds on the air, it feeds on the wind, so that the mind feeds on those attachments as it jumps from one life to another. If there's no fuel, there's no jumping. there is no rebirth, and so that the Buddha's description is trying to say, free the mind from its delusions. It's not about anything that was there, that was owned, that's being lost, but rather an illusion that the mind was caught in is now dissolving. It's like coming out of a dream and, oh, it was just a dream. Oh my goodness, it was so real. Oh. So it's like the mind coming out of a dream and coming back to reality. Has the dream been lost? Just because it's come to an end. But rather, what is realized instead is the reality of wakefulness. So I don't know if that's helpful, but does that answer some of your question? Yeah, Martin's got a hand up there.
No. I was listening very carefully to your list of characteristics of the Arahant, any enlightened being. And there were two which I was listening for, but I didn't hear. I didn't hear an equivalent of them. They are humility and gratitude. And I wondered whether there are lots of characteristics which you can have an infinite number, but I do regard gratitude as a very important one. It's easy to be grateful to God, but who is this God that I don't believe exists? So the other one is humility. I'm only a clever monkey. That's the best idea of my value. There is no capacity for me to become a superior being. And I wondered how you feel about that, how the Buddha expressed himself.
Well, that's good questions. I would rephrase it a little bit with humility, because it's the word that is more used in that area. In a way, it needs rephrasing, because humility doesn't have the same place, or even if there is a Pali word for humility, exactly, its place in the psychological map, if you like, is held by conceit. Manyati is conceiving, that's self-conceit. And so it's a little bit broader than humility, because so conceit in Buddhist psychology doesn't just mean that you think you're better than everybody. To think that that I am worse than everybody is also a conceit. So that there's what they call the 9 kinds of conceit, if you want the detail. If you are better than everyone and you think that you're better, that's a conceit. If you're better than everyone and you think you're the same as, that's a conceit. If you're better than everyone and you think you're worse than everyone, that's a conceit. If you're the same as everyone and you think you're better, that's a conceit. If you're the same as everyone and you think you're the same as everyone, that's a conceit. If you're the same as everyone and you think that you're worse, that's a conceit. If you're worse than everyone and you think you're the best, that's a conceit. If you're worse than everyone and you think you're the same as, that's a conceit. And if you're worse than everyone and you think you're worse than everyone, that's still a conceit. So every dimension of I-making and mind-making is conceit. So it's self-conception, really. And so that sometimes humility, like, I am like they say in that old joke, like, I'm no one, I'm nothing. And then the other person in the church saying, "God, look at who thinks he's nothing." Yeah. That the mind can grab the idea of humility and make a feast out of it, even if it might be accurate in some way. The Buddhist approach, what the Buddha's teaching points to over and over again, is that I-making and mind-making. Even if it's accurate, like if you think you're average and you are average, that's still a self-conception. It's still a conceit, because the mind is creating an I am. It's believing in that I-ness, that me-ness, that my-ness, and is necessarily creating division, alienation, and dukkha on account of that. So humility is rather is spoken of in terms of letting go of all kinds of conceit, all kinds of self-conception, all kinds of I am. So that's one of the reasons why the Buddha never used the words I am. He even coined the term Tathagata to refer to himself. You can think it was just semantics to make up a new word for yourself, but that was as a central principle in his teaching. And so any kind of self-conception, any kind of I am that's believed in, I mean, he would use personal pronouns like he and she and we and they, and sometimes people accused him of, what are you doing using these personal pronouns like, you and they and she and he? I thought all dhammas were not self. You can almost hear the Buddha rolling his eyes like, I'm just using the conventions of common speech in order to communicate, but without delusion about some permanent individual entity. So that that humility, a genuine humility, I would say, from the Buddhist approach, is completely based upon that freedom from conceiving. Manyati is the Pali word for conceiving. Manyati. And so that the heart being free of conceiving yourself as better, conceiving yourself as the same, or conceiving yourself as worse than, or whatever. Any kind of self-conception is necessarily out of tune with reality. With respect to gratitude, there's an interesting, what springs to mind as you were speaking, is immediately after the Buddha's enlightenment, then he reflects, I've arrived at this realization without a teacher. That I had these other meditation teachers like Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputta. They helped me along the way, and my old sort of companions I was an ascetic with, but in terms of understanding, I did this without a teacher, so I haven't really got anyone to be grateful for. And then he makes this comment that saying, one lives unhappily who has nothing to respect, who has no one to look up to. And so that's his own reflection. So that it's I've got nothing to look up to is a sadness. He says, well, who can I respect? Who can I express gratitude to? Because I've arrived at this realization just from within my own mind. And then he said, there's the Dhamma. There's this reality, the Dhamma itself, this fundamental reality of things. That is what I can pay respects to. So then that's, in a way, the first gesture of taking refuge in Dhamma was the Buddha after his enlightenment, and expressing that quality of gratitude. That said, within the Buddhist tradition and the customs within the monastic training, is that you have a quality of gratitude is encouraged and consciously cultivated with your teachers, your mentors, those through whom you've come into the monastic life, and so that it's sometimes spoken of in terms of a debt, that you're a debt of gratitude, but it's not quite the same as the English word debt. It's more like, as this word katavedi, which is the natural wish to respond from an experience of gratitude. So you feel grateful, so you want to do something. You want to do something in respect to that. So it's not exactly a debt, but the sense of I want to do something. I want to express the appreciation that comes from this relationship of being helped. So even if your teacher is someone who is disreputable or who's really sort of fallen from grace, then you still express gratitude to them. Like Ajahn Chah's preceptor was a monk who had a pretty poor reputation in the area. He was actually the abbot of the monastery in Bungwai village, where Wat Pah Nanachat is based. This is not privileged information. He was well known to be someone who was not widely respected. But he was Ajahn Chah's preceptor. So when Ajahn Chah became a bhikkhu, this monk was the preceptor who ran the ceremony. And so even though he had a very poor reputation and Ajahn Chah was known as an arahant, every year Ajahn Chah would take a group of his sangha and go and pay respects to this monk out of genuine, sincere gratitude. You were the doorway that I came into this. So I feel I'm grateful. And that's not just like a begrudging ritual that you do because you have to do, but Ajahn Chah really encouraged a sincere expression of that. And you get it many times in the suttas where Venerable Sariputta, the Buddha's chief disciple, he, if I'm remembering this correctly, he first learnt the teaching through Venerable Assaji, who was one of the Buddha's original companions. So every night before Sariputta retired to sleep, he would think, okay, now where is Venerable Asaji living? Like paying respects to Mecca. Okay, where is Asaji? And he would think, okay, oh, he's in Rajagaha or he's in Vaisali. So he would orient himself to wherever he thought Venerable Asaji was staying, and he would bow down to him and pay respects. He was the one I first heard the Dhamma from, and so there was that sense of we're connected, and I owe you, and thank you so much. Similarly, another touching story. The monk who brought Ajahn Sumedho to Wat Pah Pong when Ajahn Sumedho was a newly ordained bhikkhu in Nong Khai. He was living in a meditation monastery in Nong Khai, and he realized this place ran a very, very tight meditation routine, but it didn't have a very strong Vinaya discipline tradition. It was like a meditation center. And so he thought, well, I want to be a monk for many, many years, the rest of my life, but I can't live in retreat the whole time. I need to learn how to be a monk. I need to learn the discipline. And this monk came to visit. He was from a family in Nong Khai, and Somai, and he came back for a family funeral, and he was staying at this monastery, and the newly ordained Bhikkhu Sumedho thought, wow, this monk is really different. He's very composed, his robes are very tidy, he's very, everything is kind of patched and repaired, and is very impressive demeanor. And amazingly enough, this monk actually spoke some English, which is very, very rare in northeast Thailand at that time. And he found out that he was from Wat Pah Pong, and so he said, can I go and study with your teacher? And so then it turned out he got permission from from Ajahn Sumedho, got permission from his preceptor, went down and trained with Ajahn Chah. A few years later, Tan Somai ended up disrobing and became an alcoholic, and was really very in a very, very distressed state. So he'd be like falling down drunk in the street, and Ajahn Chah said to the young Ajahn Sumedho, you should, whenever Somai comes to visit, you should always go and spend time with him. You should think of him, and like Sariputta paid respects to Asaji, you should pay respects to Somai, even though he's a layperson, you're a monk. Don't forget him. He says, you're the one good thing. You're a bright light in his life, so don't let him forget. And so whenever Somai would come to the monastery, and he was full of tears and regret, and then Ajahn Sumedho would always make sure that he sought him out and spent time with him to kind of comfort him and befriend him and remind him of you're the one who brought me to Wat Pah Pong. I'm grateful. That's never going to go away. And he actually he fell down in the street and was killed by a car. Eventually, he died. But that is a story that Ajahn Sumedho, you probably heard him tell it, that even if your teacher or those who've helped you have gone seriously off track, there's still that connection and that sense of gratitude that is like a natural response of the heart. And so arahantship doesn't say, okay, I'm beyond greed, hatred, and delusion. Okay, all sankharas are impermanent. Everything is empty. Mum and dad are just empty formations. It doesn't work that way at all. It doesn't work that way at all. Rather, when the heart is free of greed, hatred, and delusion, there's a responsiveness to those who have been part of our life and those who helped us along the way and those to whom we are connected. There's a story of the Buddha picking up the delusion in the mind of a Brahma god who used to be a teacher of his in a previous life. He said, this conceit has arisen in the mind of the Brahma god Baka. I should go and see if I can help. So he beams up to the Brahma world and has a dialogue with the Brahma god Baka to try and free him from this wrong view, because he's grateful that he was a teacher of mine in a past life many, many eons ago. I want to help this being, even though this being is in a Brahma world. They're caught in this conceit of thinking that they are the creator of the universe. So I better help. So that Katanyuta is gratitude, and Katavedi is that the natural responsiveness of the heart. But I see it's now gone past 4 o'clock. The afternoon has sped by, so thank you all for your good attention.